Hey everybody, it's Tinderbox Meetup with Michael Becker, and it's Saturday, December 6th already. I'm Mark Bernstein, the designer of Tinderbox, and we're we were just talking about what to talk about, and we started talking about the collection fallacy. And so here with the collection fallacy is Michael Becker.
Hey everybody. All right, let's start with the generalized format of the meetup. So we typically talk about all things Tinderbox and or note taking or tools for thought. We go around the room, see if we have anybody new. We don't. If we have a theme, we jump into the theme. We'll have one on the 20th, by the way. We're going to get a really great markdown demo from Jacob, one of our community members. And or we just start talking about our generalized projects. And we do want to, and we kicked off about 10 a few weeks ago with Dave Rogers, this idea of doing some best practice or quick little demo ideas is something we've been doing for a while. So I do have a couple best practice ideas that I can throw out there for today. But before we get into that, let's talk about Jeremy's question. And Jeremy's was asking about using Gemini specifically because he's been maybe you can talk about what you've been experiencing with Claude that hasn't been working for you, Jeremy. And then you talked about the idea of wanting to explore Gemini a little bit more. And we did put in the chat a Gemini integration with Tinderbox meetup that we did a few weeks back. That, again, Jeremy, I think it would find really helpful. But why don't you set the stage again for us, and then I'll respond with my comment about the collection fallacy.
Sure. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, I have been using Claude. I guess that I've felt that it's kind of going on a bit of a downward productivity curve. I'm primarily using it to kind of help me do kind of basic lifting, figure out ways to kind of fix a prototype that doesn't work properly or isn't doing quite what I want it to do. In other words, maybe sort of papering over the cracks in my own technical ability, or rather my ability to remember things that I thought I would remember, but turns out I don't. So I haven't been using it so much to interrogate the notes, but at some point I'm working on a new document for a new kind of project, and so it hasn't really reached that point, but I would be interested in hearing, what people's experience of that is, and then to see whether Gemini has for anyone been a better partner in both of those aspects.
Okay, so I was taking it a bit farther than your question. I was taking your question my response to your question in a different path. So what I heard you just said, you've been trying to use Claude to help you use Tinderbox. Whereas I was trying to respond to the question of the integration between AI and Tinderbox for my broader knowledge management working efforts, not necessarily on how to use Tinderbox.
Yeah, so they're both of them, right? But I would like to use it for the latter and have tried it on some of my existing documents, and it's kind of interesting. It does find things that I hadn't found, but I found that kind of Perplexity knows Tinderbox better than Claude does in terms of functionality, and at least in my experience. So for that, I really feel like if it's going to be useful, it has to be useful in both of those functions to kind of help me technically, because I'm not immersed in Tinderbox every day, so I kind of forget things. And then secondly, what is it going to tell me about my data that might surprise me or give me some ideas that I didn't have?
Okay, do you have any thoughts on that, Mr. Bernstein?
First, talk to me about Perplexity and Tinderbox. I've not tried that.
Well, it's just simply, sort of saying, I'm trying to do this and it's not working in Tinderbox. What should I do? And it doesn't do it for me, but it's maybe a better kind of learning tool in that then I have to do it manually and it either works or it doesn't. Claude is very keen to do everything itself, often without me kind of asking it to. So when I ask it a question, I found that generally
I have found that things go much better if you insist on Claude not doing things itself to your documents. On the other hand, I'm perfectly happy to have Claude write as many scripts as it likes. And while I appreciate Claude asking permission to look at this file and this file, I seldom, if ever, have said, no, you can't look at that file. But when I let Claude, at least with code, when I let Claude touch the code, it gets very unpleasant and messy. Uh, and Don't do that. I've lost the citation, but some one on their blog distinguished using AI as a tool and AI as a service. And I think that's insightful. When you start asking it to do things for you instead of asking it to do the things you're telling it to do, it can get itself into pathological loops. I had a terrible one on Thursday fixing the JSON parser in Tinderbox, and it just said, "Oh, I got to fix this. Oh, and that means I got to fix this." And I was recovering from a whopping flu shot, so I was saying, "Go ahead, fix it, fix it." I'm going to sit here in my misery, and it got itself into a terrible fix. It was not pretty. So
Can,
don't do that.
okay, and I'm a bit confused by your language, Mark. Can you explain the idea of tools versus service a little
Uh,
better for me?
yeah, organize my Tinderbox file is a bad thing to ask the AI to do. Find all of the notes that look like this in the file and put them in put them in a new container. If you have a note that sort of looks like this, ask me about it, and I'll tell you if it's one of the notes to move or not.
Okay.
That's yeah. You're in control. You know what you're doing,
So that
but you're letting
those
it automate some of it.
those are tool examples.
Yeah,
And
service. Organize my Tinderbox.
okay, got it.
Yeah, give
And,
me an outline for my next book.
okay, and that would be a service or a tool. I just
That
again,
would
I'm
be a service.
okay,
Write my term paper.
okay. Right. Well, and I guess that comes back to what Sasha was talking about. And is it Andy Boyd, the nephrologist that spoke to us?
Yeah.
And my students that I just finished up my last term with my students. And it's pretty much universally everyone's coming down to AI is great when you're a knowledgeable in your field. AI gets really squirrely when you're not, right? Because you just can't tell when it's bullshitting you or not. Whereas
Well,
when
there's both the bullshit and there are other things.
and
Claude Code has no taste in code. It can focus on problems beautifully. It can do 10-step deductive chains to explain how something that cannot crash did crash that make my eyes glaze over. But it writes everything as if it's sample code for a demo, which is no way to build systems. And it just doesn't know better.
so Jeremy, does this any of this help at all? Or not really?
Yeah, it does. I think I've definitely had the kind of same experience as Mark, that it's sort of indiscriminate in a way. So I kind of got very excited initially because I use AI in lots of other areas. It's kind of a big part of my day, and so the idea of being able to get it to help me in Tinderbox was pretty exciting, and it was. But I've realized now that I have to kind of step back a little bit and maybe try again with Gemini, but in the role that you're talking about in terms of kind of knowledge exploration and whether it can see things that I can't with the data that I got.
Mr. Chuck.
I wanted to follow up on a couple of things. First of all, I have found Perplexity helpful, but not in actually doing anything. I've never bothered to try and have it code for me or address things. But when it comes to what's a good approach to a problem, and if I can pose the questions correctly, then I find that very helpful. And I have to confess, I'm extremely conservative about my use of AI. I'm only using it within my field of discipline and rarely using it for anything that's on a personal level, although that's occasionally is helpful. And what I found Mark's description of tools versus services kind of interesting because I had the opposite interpretation. To me, a tool is something that actually engages and does something. So I would have thought tool use of AI is where you're actually having AI code for you do things, whereas service is a little bit more of how I'm using Perplexity. And I suspect Jeremy is where you're getting information back from the AI system, which you then interpret and you decide how to act on. You don't expect the AI system to actually do anything for you other than help you assess and assimilate information. And I'm not sure where the public or the larger community is coming down on how those terms are defined. But I think that one of the issues I see over and over again is that terminology is very confusing in the AI space. Lots of people act very assuredly and knowledgeable about how things are structured and what this is and what that is and what's agentic and what's not agentic and so forth. And I think that we're all sort of chasing our tails a little bit, not understanding completely what we're dealing with, which is understandable because it's not easily understood. So I just, there's just kind of observational. I prefer to have an arm's length distance between AI and actual turning a crank. I want to be in the middle of that. And that's just me being very conservative, and I may be missing opportunities. I just openly admit to that. But I think that's one of the reasons why I find the Perplexity model a little bit more entertaining, or a little bit more useful.
Just a quick note to not forget about Command Shift U, the command bar, which is built into Tinderbox and which does give you a fast definition of what collect and collective do and the order of their arguments. I just did try asking Claude, and Claude gave a wrong answer on how to use collective. So ATB-ref or the command bar still win.
For sure.
All right. And Jeremy, let's go back to I think this could be a really helpful kind of thread for today's dialogue. Let's go back to like what have you been wanting Tinderbox to do for you? Like what have you been wanting to remember how to do? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Ouch. Asking me to remember things that happened 5 or 10 minutes ago is hard enough. Yeah, look, I mean, it's stuff that would probably be quite basic, but because I'm jumping into, I'm not immersed in Tinderbox in quite the same way that I should be, or other sort of users are, and therefore it's quite easy for me to forget things. And so, and I, for the life of me, can't think of an example, but if one pops up, I'll let you know. But it's essentially that you're kind of say, I want to say to it, oh, look, go and fix this prototype because it's not showing the right caption, and I don't quite understand why, and da 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 da. And I would say most of the time it doesn't really do that. And I'm cautious like Mark now that I'd say don't actually change anything. Just tell me what you're going to do before you do it. But then if I flip over to Perplexity and ask the same question, just prefacing it with Tinderbox and saying, how do I change da 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 da, it'll give a more assertive and correct answer, I've noticed, in the times that I've measured it. And so I had always thought that, the wonderful thing about Tinderbox is that it's forever customizable. It's just your imagination that kind of limits usage, but it's also that kind of bewildering sense that unless you invest a lot of time in it and are under the age of 40, so you can actually kind of remember what you've learned, then you're in a strong position. But kind of coming back into it, because I use things like the kind of the brain and Devon Think and Markdown outliners and stuff as much as I use Tinderbox. So it's just that kind of hurdle, that fence to jump back into Tinderbox and say, oh, I could really do this. I'm pondering today, for example, I haven't tried it, so I don't know whether it works or not, but I'm getting enough stuff in there that I want to start using NL tags to help me collect data that matches certain things. And I think I haven't asked Perplexity or Claude about that, but that would be interesting to say, okay, take a look at this and what do you think of the things that I could do with it? Claude always has a very ambitious idea of what to do with it. And I've noticed that most of the time it's too ambitious and doesn't really stand up to close scrutiny. But I feel I still consider myself a kind of novice in this, and that I don't throw myself at it all the time. And I kind of love that idea that maybe Claude would be that kind of, friendly person on your shoulders, sort of saying, hey, you might want to think about doing this, might want to think about doing that. And unfortunately, it hasn't been that reliable in that sense. So I would be as likely to kind of go through the forums and figure it out myself, or check in with Perplexity or someone else to see what they say and then take the aggregate.
Okay. So I have a few best practice responses to your statement you just made. I get that there's a knee-jerk reaction of wanting to ask Claude or Perplexity or Gemini and say, how do I do this? And it certainly can be helpful. I would argue probably the best place to start is ATB-ref. And it goes all the way back to read the documentation. And so in some respects, it depends on what you're trying to do, but like setting up an NL tag operation, it's very clearly written out in ATB-ref and doable. So you might find yourself getting to the answer faster with less frustration just by pulling up ATB-ref and reading it. And that might be something, and we might want to try that NL tag setup right now as a demo we can do today.
Michael, maybe just to kind of clarify here, I'm not suggesting I don't know how to set up an NL tag. Actually, it's one of the more basic ones, I agree.
Right.
And ATB-ref is good for that. What I'm saying is that, are you able to ask AI, what would be a good way of doing this? And for it to understand the mechanics of Tinderbox well enough to come back with an answer. I think it's I'm plucking that example out of the air, but it's probably one of the simpler things to do. Right. But I'm not talking necessarily about just kind of basic functionality, although sometimes that is necessary. And love ATB-ref, though I do. Sometimes it's not as easy to parse for someone who's not steeped in it. And so it's better to ask an AI that can sort of convert it into a more accessible tongue for amateurs like me. But it's that idea of saying, okay, if I'm going to do this, it would be the same way I'll kind of be coming to all you guys and saying, I'm thinking of setting up NL tags for this topic, and have a look at my Tinderbox document. Tell me what you think would be a good way of doing it. And that might throw up ideas that might save me from repeating a failure in the past, or overindulgence of NL tags where it slows the thing down, these kind of things. Okay.
Got it. So it's more of less of a how-to question and more of a strategic why question.
Or how best to, or what might be the best outcome you're looking for.
Might be more of a how best to versus a specific mechanics question.
Correct.
And you're right. That's where ATB-ref very consciously differentiates. Mark Anderson's done a very conscious effort not to put a how best to language into ATB ref, because then that can just go into an infinitum number of different examples and become nearly impossible to maintain. So that's right. Yeah. So that, okay. I see where you're coming from that. Um, yeah, that's a challenge. I think that's a general challenge with just knowledge management in general, and especially with a universal tool like Tinderbox, because there is no one way to do it, or no one best way to do it, and it evolves over time depending on the nature of your project, and your individual skill set. So that's a tough one to answer immediately. Yeah, Mr. Bernstein.
Yeah, one thing about the way I have currently set up the Tinderbox AI integrations is I'm giving the AI very little information about Tinderbox usage, really just enough to begin to get things going. So we don't use up too much of the context on teaching a Tinderbox. My first impulse was say, go away, read ATB ref, and come back. And it would either say, oh, that's too much, I'll lie, or it would do it and say, okay, I'm finished, see you tomorrow. Uh, so that's not useful. But of course, if you're asking it for an interesting, non-trivial tinderbox question, then it may simply not have enough information to and but it probably is possible to put together a bigger cheat sheet that actually covers more of the tinderbox language, and that might be an interesting thing to spin off from best practices or this AI integration. What would you want it to look at if you actually wanted it to be a tinderbox master instead of just getting by with the minimum necessary?
Yeah, Mr. Rogers, do you have any thoughts?
I do, but they're straying far afield from Tinderbox at the moment. But let me just put this out there. Um, I have a little hobby, retro computing, where I go back and play with old Apple II computers. And that was in the early 80s when computers were a new thing, and the idea of personal computing was going to be a liberating tool. And so all these home computers, personal computers, home computers specifically, came equipped with BASIC. And your computer didn't do really very much unless you learned how to program it to do something. And there was a whole cottage industry of magazines and stuff that you could type in programs. And it was all very difficult and not very productive, and not very many people did anything useful with their home computer. Maybe some people did their books with it, with managing your money and other programs like that. That step forward to the iPhone and the age of apps, where everything a computer is an appliance that hosts apps, and the apps are the machines that do things that you want them to do. We don't program the computer at all. We just launch an app and we learn the app interface, and the app does all the work. Now it feels as though we are about to kind of complete the circle where AI, conversational AI, is at the point where we can instruct it to tell the computer how to do something. We can tell the AI to program this solution in Tinderbox, or program this solution in Swift, or whatever. And so actually using a computer as a computing device, that's assuming the individual is aware enough or interested enough in using a computing solution um, that really takes advantage of the power of the computer, as opposed to simply as a host for an app that you bought from a store that somebody, marketed. So that's kind of, what I was just thinking about is I use ChatGPT very sparingly and mostly for personal stuff. I just want a quick answer to something. And if you try and Google anything today, your first 20 hits are all ads and nonsense. So it's easier to just ask ChatGPT. what I was thinking about, I need an integration between ChatGPT and Tinderbox so I can quickly capture that response and put it in my captain's log so I can find it again later. It's not really a problem right now because it's in the ChatGPT interface. Again, a closed app solution. Whereas, I have this incredible computing resource in front of me, an M3 14-inch MacBook Pro that I don't take, 1/10 the advantage of in terms of what it's capable of doing. So that's just kind of where this talk about using the AI to help develop solutions in Tinderbox or Mark, it sounded like you were using it to help actually program the application of Tinderbox, a JSON parser. So we've made computers smart enough to teach us to help us use computers is where we're at, which was I think what Microsoft was trying to do with Clippy, with much to everybody's embarrassment. But so that's kind of where my thoughts were going as I was listening to the conversation.
Dude, stop hating on Clippy. Come on. Clippy was awesome. Mr. Chuck.
Oh, Dave made an interesting observation, and I wanted to follow up on it because it was something I've been thinking about. Um, I apologize that I have not delved enough into the existing AI integration for Tinderbox, but what I would really like is to be able to engage in we'll call it a chat, an interactive session with Perplexity or Chat GPT or what have you, and be able to cherry pick the items of information that come up out of that and get them easily into Tinderbox because that's where I want these things. I want these things as notes that I can then track and maybe use for follow-up explorations in the future. Information is gathered. I mean, it'll come up with a useful table. Right now, what I'm doing is I'm just exporting these things as PDFs, just so I have a record of what I've done. But getting that into Tinderbox in a useful fashion is something I've been giving a lot of thought to, and I guess I'm interested in whether that's feasible or if that's something that's in the works, or do people have experience doing that?
Well, there's a couple things. One is, so as you're interacting with the tools, that is one of the base level capabilities that Mark has built with the AI integration, and that the AI tools, Gemini and Claude, can create notes in your file based on the outputs that the AI has generated for you. And that works great, but that goes back to the point that I was kind of starting with or attempting to respond to Jeremy's point, which I thought was his question, but it wasn't. But that now circles back to all the way very beginning of the call. And that for me is the collection fallacy, in that what I found personally is I'll interrogate and interact with the AI really well. It comes back with, say, 1,200 great words, but all I really care about is the 400 words in the middle or that table it generated for me. And I don't want all, I don't, I'm finding that when I'm using the AI, it's creating too much crap in my Tinderbox file. It's putting it all in the Tinderbox file, and I don't need all of it. I just need that part. And so therefore I found, for my strategy, couple things. I'm like, oh, hey, AI, that was great. Can you now give me that table in Markdown so I can paste it into Tinderbox? Or I'll grab the HTML version out of the AI, paste it into Obsidian. Obsidian will auto convert that formatted text to Markdown for me, and I paste it into Tinderbox. So I found the auto note creation in Tinderbox, as cool as it is, from an efficiency perspective, from my thinking and knowledge management, it creates too many notes for me. It's the collection fallacy. I at the end of the day, I feel like I'm producing so much fantastic work because look at all the notes that got created for me, but then I end up not doing anything with them and they just get in the way.
So can I jump in here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And then
So
Mr. Bernstein was shaking his head. I'm curious as what his response to some of that was. But go.
Yeah, but I've had thoughts along Chuck's line there where, and I think it's a simple matter. I think I'm reluctant to allow AI to meddle with my Tinderbox document. I mean, I don't understand either well enough to know what happened if something went wrong. or where to look to fix it. So in the Chat GPT interface, you could just highlight the text and then create an automation using AppleScript or shortcuts.
Mhm.
And just it's Tinderbox is very robust in its AppleScript dictionary, and you could maybe use an app like PopClip where you run a little automation that grabs that captured text and then transmits it to your Tinderbox document. Now, this is going to be on a bespoke document. It's not going to be a general solution for any Tinderbox document that you happen to have open. You'll have to identify the document and have a mechanism for it to create the note in the container that you want. And something like Captain's Log, where everything is just chronological, that's very simple to do. If you have a more specific project in mind, then you'll have to develop your solution to address that structure. But I think it's very straightforward. It's just something that occurred to me recently as I was using ChatGPT and then again this morning as we were talking about it. But I think it's very doable with the tools that we have available. It doesn't require AI controlling your Tinderbox document and just to capture that information. So that makes sense.
Does. It does. And no, but that does raise a interesting thing. And like you are so much farther ahead of me in the use of AppleScript. Like then like we're flipped. I'm ahead of you on Tinderbox, and you're like so ahead of me on AppleScript. I can't make heads or tails of AppleScript. It drives me.
It's a very limited, superficial understanding. I know enough, just enough to do what I want to do in Tinderbox. And when I integrate other apps like photos, I think, and Tinderbox, I go to the AppleScript community, the forums there I forget what it is, scripting.net or not, that's Dave Weiner's thing. There's another forum where you can ask a question and they will explain the more arcane aspects of the object model where I thought a photograph was an object, was an item, but apparently when you select a photograph and photos, turns out you're actually selecting a list and then you process lists differently than individual items. And if you don't do that, then your script doesn't work. So there are little idiosyncrasies, but it's easy to get an answer from the community. Now, it may even be easy to get an answer from ChatGPT today or Claude or Perplexity or what have you. But yeah, I would be more inclined to use the tools that we have that the operating system affords to automate interaction between the AI and its own native interface and Tinderbox. I would be reluctant to let the AI have its hands on my Tinderbox files.
Yeah, I get it. Makes sense. A couple other anybody any other thoughts, comments, Chuck?
Yeah, just again following up on what Dave was saying. One of the things that I've been doing just recently, so this is all new, and I apologize if I'm running over stuff that other people have already put a lot of effort into or thought into. But I've been using the Perplexity app more. And the reason is it gives me good organization of the dialogue that I have with it. And what has been hitting me almost every time I use it is really be wonderful if that sort of integration existed inside Tinderbox. And I have this funny feeling that's what is there. I just haven't had the time to really get into it and figure it out. But this ability to interact within my document and on my own initiative decide what do I want to wind up in the document, not just all the other asides. I'll give an example. One of the things that I run into with Perplexity, one of my frustrations with it at the moment, is I ask it a question. It gives me a summary response. I find that useful. But then it gives me a bunch of little questions at the end, follow-up questions. Those are really very useful. And the minute you click on one of them, you lose the others, which annoys the hell out of me. So I've gotten into the habit of every time I get that first dialogue, the first thing I do is capture those questions and set them aside because I know I'm going to want to look at them later. And to me, that would be the perfect thing to have in Tinderbox. Capture those questions. In many respects, that's where you get the most value out of an AI discussion is knowing the right things to ask and filtering through dozens of questions saying, that's important, that one's important, I don't care about those. Oh, but this one's also something I never thought about. That's the kind of dialogue I like to have, and I'd like to have a better way of capturing that and being able to dig differently, go in different directions, begin to create links, begin to start associating it with other things I'm working on. That's a wishful dream. And I'm loving the fact that Mark is sitting there
Nodding
shaking
his
his head.
head.
So I really like
Yeah.
turn it over to him.
So Mark, yeah, you've been nodding your head for the last 5 minutes or so. So what's happening inside Mr. Bernstein? What are you thinking?
Yeah, a couple of interesting things. One, for your question about Claude making a ocean of notes which are not useful. If you think about teaching students, especially students who have never taken notes, and now you're telling them to take notes. They tend either to err fantastically in the area of, I don't need to take notes, I'll just remember everything. Or they take fanatic notes and they write everything down literally and take zillions of notes. And that, of course, is also a very poor strategy. And so you end up lecturing them. You tell them, no, that's a bad way to take notes. A better way is to be more selective and take notes about the main points and consider hierarchically organizing your notes. Consider linking your notes. And of course, you say that, and some of the students are going to rush off and link every note to every other note. And that's unproductive. So it's a long-term problem. Uh, I do this quite a bit when yeah, Claude has its section of a Tinderbox for its notes, which are meant to help Claude get up to speed when we revisit this topic in a week or a month. And uh, giving it hints about what it might want to be able to, and hints at the beginning of a session about what's likely to be pertinent and what not to bother with can be very helpful. Uh, the other thing which I think is fascinating is like Sasha and Lumen and Tiago Forte all write books about the right way to take notes and smart notes and evergreen notes, Matuchik. Uh, and we've got an entire little corner of the literature about how to take effective notes. But actually, this is all metaphysics. We think that this is a good way to take notes, but it's really hard to prove to ourselves that these are effective ways to take notes. Uh, but that's a machine. The AI is a machine. And uh, if we can figure out what tools and what procedures actually concrete and objective about note taking that doesn't rely on hand waving assertions that, of course, this must be right. And I think that's really quite interesting.
You cut out a little bit, and I missed a point in the transition. So can you conclude that last couple sentences?
Yeah, we have the opportunity to take this machine, which is just a mechanism, and my internet connection is unstable. This always happens when I get going. But it's just a machine. If we have a tool and a procedure for using the tool that actually demonstrably improves its performance, then we have an objective reason to think that this note-taking approach is actually productive.
Okay. And how do we figure that out? How do we figure out what works or doesn't work? What is the are we going to be constantly in this, never really going to know the most effective way of taking notes, or is it just so personal that we don't know and it's always going to be somewhat subjective?
Well, for example, uh, we current in Tinderbox hints readings, we have one or two notes that are trying to teach as much as much basic Tinderbox as we can with as few words as we need to use. And the one that we have now is mostly something I wrote on the spur of the moment one day, with a few refinements to cover things that were egregiously absent. Uh, but obviously, that could be shorter and tighter and could cover more things. For example, if it covered collect it and collect if, then Claude would have a reasonable answer to how do I use collect if. It doesn't. Uh, So at some point, there's like the best file we can make that explains what you need to know about Tinderbox in less than, say, 500 words.
Okay, got it.
And then you teach Claude or Gemini or Perplexity to write that for its future use.
Mhm. Yeah, but it's interesting though, because I think the AI is having as much trouble as say Jeremy is, or any of us is, in that, that difference between this is how you do it versus here's a best practice or an effective strategic way of doing it. And what we find in the community, for example, if there's one way to do something, there's 10. And the choice that one picks out of that 10 is really based on your experience with the tool, your specific project, the amount of time you have available, and the way your brain works versus someone else's. I just think I think that's where that it gets kind of challenging for all these tools and even the human. I think we as AI agents interacting with each other to explain this thing, it gets pretty complex. Chuck, you have a comment response? Looks like you're thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking about um, programming languages and how we have dealt with them over the years. And a lot of it historically was you picked up books to learn programming languages. Um, and I've been collecting these books for a long time. Always thinking I'm going to spend some more time doing software development, but whatever. What I've recognized is that there are four types of books. There's the book that tries to be a tutorial, tries to teach you in 5 lunchtime sessions or in a week of Sundays. It tries to teach you a programming language. There are books that try to be reference guides. ATBREF is an example of a reference guide. But they include all the details, all the facts. I mean, you can use it as a kind of dictionary. Go look up what this function does, or go look up how this syntax is handled. Then there are the cookbooks, which everybody seems to really love. Here's a bunch of worked examples that you can use to figure things out. And then there are the books that step back and say, here's how to approach the problem. Here's how to think about what you want to accomplish. Here's how to design or architect a solution using this language and its ecosystem. And those are often the most valuable books, but the hardest for the novice person to pick up on because it involves a lot of broad thinking and conceptualizing beyond I just want to get this one little thing done. So I think in a sense, AI has got to go through some of the same kinds of contortions to think about a subject matter like Tinderbox. And the forum is full of lots of cookbook type examples. But are they detailed enough? Are they consistent enough to be useful to an AI, which is a really pretty dumb system? Um, we have the architectural guides. I mean, I think of the Tinderbox Way or Thinking with Tinderbox. Those are wonderful guides. I'm not sure how an AI system would make much sense of them because I think that's operating at an abstract level that's above what most AI systems are capable of. Maybe I'm wrong. But those are just some observations that I think there are a lot of steps between where we are today and where we need to be if we want AI to actually be useful. And we got to think about it in the same way of how did we train ourselves? How did we learn these subjects? And what were the various methods that we explored to get there? I think we got to think AI needs the same kind of guidance. I don't know if that makes any sense or not, but
Yeah. Chuck, could you give us some examples of the category 4 book? I think I know what you mean, but
And maybe a more discrete label of what you would call it. It's not strategy, is it, or something?
well, okay. So starting at the baseline, um, there are the books that are tutorial in nature, walk you through using it, um, walk you through how to download the Python library, talk you through how to go through all the operational aspects of using an editor to create your program, and then talk you through the various steps. What are the variables? How do you name variables? How do doing all of the things you would do that would be tutorial in nature. Take somebody from a position of not knowing much to the point where they can do something.
right.
The next thing is, to a certain extent, is okay, I now know how to do something, but the language I'm working with, Python, for instance, has got a huge array of various things. How do I find out about what all the various declarations and function calls and operators, where do I get information about what that operator actually does? And that's where the reference guide is very helpful. And there are now reference guides to all the libraries of Python that you can go out to, because that's a huge issue for anybody trying to do anything with Python these days. Is there the massive libraries that are very capable. They can take you into almost any domain you want to work in. But for the novice person, how do you gain insight as to which libraries or what libraries are even available? That again is a type of reference manual. And then there's the cookbooks. And I don't know why, but cookbooks are very popular. Everybody wants something to show me what it is, something to start with. And there's value to that. I don't mean to be dismissive of it, but being able to, they basically say, you have this problem, here's how you solve it. And they give you the actual code. And for a lot of people, that's helpful because it allows them to take something that works and then think about how they want to jigger it around what they want to do. And then the highest level is the architectural discussion, the design discussion. If you're going to build an application that's going to involve a database, how do you want to approach that if you're doing that with a tool like Tinderbox or a tool like Python? What architectural issue? What are the performance problems you've got to factor in? How are you going to deal with networking issues? How are you going to have this application work across a network with other parts of that application? Those are the architectural design elements that are often very important to whether or not an application is viable or not. So you could talk, for example, about how do you architect a mobile app? Well, that mobile app has got to tie into the mobile device, the iPhone, for instance, but it's also got to tie into cloud services. It's got to tie into synchronization services. Those are all complex design topics that you'd like some guidance on before you start diving into doing them.
Oh.
And that's where good texts that deal with design are very helpful.
What are some examples of that group of books that we might have heard of?
Oh, I don't, hold on a second.
The JavaScript book by Shelley Powers that's like that
Yeah,
thick.
oh, yeah. The there's a series of books that O'Reilly and others have done that are the good parts.
In a nutshell.
In,
The
in a
nutshell.
nutshell, well, in a nutshell is more just getting you started. But the good parts of a language are sometimes more architectural focused. Give me a second, I can come up with some title names.
I mean, are you thinking of books like software tools?
Yes, software tools. Going back all the way to my early days of being a student. Operating system design principles. Um, um, there's a book I'm just an example of a title, The Art of Cybersecurity. Um, there's a lot of things that will talk to you about security, but what is what are the larger approach issues? How would you approach trying to solve a security problem with a given application? That's a very different problem than how does SSH work or how do you set up public-private keys? Um, the I'm just trying to find some more titles. um, I know I had a book that I don't much care for Microsoft and Active Directory, but I had to deal with it. And I found I was trying to find the title of the book, but um, I found a book that really talked from architectural principles. How do you deploy a domain control? How do you deploy Active Directory? What are the issues you need to deal with? Um, and I found that book to be very helpful as I was trying to, solve some problems in a real world context. And was very different from a lot of the other books that were just telling me how to functionally do things with Microsoft's tools. Um, you know, Again, there's a difference between a network book that tells you how to create configurations for a Cisco switch versus a network book that tells you how to design the network. Um, there's a difference between something that tells you how to walk through an SQL um, conceptual schema versus the book that tells you what do you do? What do you want in your conceptual schema? How do you get the conceptual schema right in the first place? Those are some of the. Am I helping? Is that helping address the issue, Mark? No,
I
am
think
I making that clear?
a lot with the book number 4. I think the biggest or the hardest challenge with book number 4 is defining the problem, right?
Yeah, and
And in a way that people can understand and agree with.
right, and for instance, that's why I liked Mark's The Tinderbox Way. He was talking about problems, and he talked about them at a high level, and then he did show how to do certain things within Tinderbox, within the Tinderbox Way. But he was talking to you about the way to approach using Tinderbox, not all the nuts and bolts. And that's the distinction. And I haven't gotten as much into thinking with Tinderbox as I would like to, but just skimming it, I get the impression it's doing all the same kind of thing. It's trying to give you the mindset as opposed to the nuts and bolts. I have a sister-in-law who is a world-class furniture designer, and she builds beautiful pieces of furniture. Um, what makes her different from a lot of other furniture designers is that she's thinking through the overall shape. What is the role of this piece of furniture? How can I put it into a different environment and keep that same role intact? How can I make the drawers fit into a different context? How can I give it an architectural flourish and yet still keep it practical? That's a level of thinking that's well above how do I run the plane across the wood to get it to have a certain surface characteristic? How do I cut the corners so they'll mesh correctly? How do I do dovetailing? All that's nuts and bolts stuff. But the design level is where a lot of the challenges are. And I don't think AI is going to be particularly good at that level for a while. I mean, it may eventually get there, but I'm skeptical as to whether or not it can play that role.
And it's interesting, as you were thinking about, what popped into my head too is when you get into that next level of expertise too, it's like, how do you put the love into it? How do you help people? Like, you can show somebody how to plane that wood, but even showing them how to plane that wood, there's that distinction between the master planer who's really ingesting their essence into the work versus someone that's just going through the motions.
Yeah, that gets into a whole nother topic, which is there's a difference between having the tools and knowing how to use the tools effectively. And yeah, I think a lot of that shows up in all aspects of information technology. There are a lot of people who know how to press the buttons and make something happen, but do they really know how to use that tool in a different context? Can they make that tool useful in some other way? I just silly little example. I just came across a Medium article that somebody popped up and said, here's a really simple Linux command that almost nobody's smart enough to use when they've got a security problem. And it's the SS command, basically to get the list of all the active processes that are currently talking out of the network interface. Now, I'm experienced enough that I know that's actually very important to understanding if you're going to deal with potential security compromises. But I suspect most people have no idea that that's where they should start. They're going to go looking at logs. They're going to go doing all the stuff that's hard and not realize there's this one tiny little command buried in their operating system that'll give them a good hint on there is or is not a problem. And secondly, get them to get you the information you need as to where you might want to go probing your logs. So little things like that are differences between knowing that there's a tool and knowing how to use the tool. And I think there's very sharp differences there.
Well, and exactly, and also diagnosing the problem. So one thing I've been learning this summer is, for most of this, I could be wrong, but this is kind of what I've been learning in the cybersecurity realm, is a lot of our effort has been around trying to keep people out. And then a lot of our effort has been trying to keep people from mucking around in the system. And and recently there's been a huge focus on the egress, keeping the data from leaving the system. And honestly, it's the latter. Keeping the data from leaving the system is absolutely the most important, because people are going to get in and people are going to fuck around. But if they can't get it out, it doesn't really matter. You can just keep, it matters, but not as much as the data leaving.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I've practiced for 3 decades now. Is the first place you start is, the general discussion about firewalls is a good firewall will start out with, you can only do these things, everything else is blocked. But most firewall approaches start on the outside coming in.
Mm-hmm.
I've always recognized that the really important part is the inside getting out. And so it's just as important to be able to put constraints on what can go out of the network as what's allowed to come in. And that's recently become a hot topic, because exploits get in before people even realize that there's so many ways for exploits to get in that these days the best approach for finding an exploit is finding who's talking out to the network that shouldn't be.
Well, and again, and not to turn this into a cybersecurity discussion, but now that we're all in the cloud too, it's really not our network anymore. And how do we manage it? And it's really about not managing the network, but the workloads and all that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. There's just so much. It's such a complex problem made so difficult because we've done so many stupid things technologically. Um, another Medium article I tripped across recently, I just had to laugh at because I remember the actual story of all this. But Netscape, one guy at Netscape, in a couple of weeks, developed JavaScript for a specific problem, for a particular little thing, and everybody picked up on it. And we did the stupidest thing you could possibly imagine. We made it standard practice. Go out to any random website and let it download code that runs on your computer. Incredibly stupid. Everything does that. So, when we start talking about how do we fix security problems, you almost can't do it because we've made everything so fragile with the stupid mistakes we've made over and over again. So it's all a matter of whack-a-mole, and let's stop this conversation here because it can get into a lot of follow-on things. Unfortunately, I don't think AI is going to help us with that problem either.
Exactly. All right. So, Mr. Rogers?
Well, so to kind of circle back to the earlier part of the discussion, I think
Thank you.
Tinderbox is a tool that can be used in from a very basic point of view as an outliner or as a visual note taker without any knowledge of action code or export code. That it is useful in that bare bones context. That as you see people using Tinderbox or interact with people in the community, you learn or discover that it can do more. And perhaps you're the kind of person that feels as though you want to be able to do that. So that's your motivation for learning. And so you try and delve into, studying ATB ref, interacting on the forum, attending the Zoom calls or what have you. And maybe it clicks with you. I know, Michael, your story of Tinderbox is that, you kept at it, kept at it, kept at it, and one day you had the epiphany, the light went on, and you understood how action code worked. What I think, in my mind, the best case scenario is that AI can kind of facilitate that transition where the Tinderbox user, will still have to have two things: a clear idea of what it is they want, or the commitment to refine their effort to get to what they ultimately discover they want. And number two, a clear understanding of the structure, the tools that are available, if not their actual application. They know a plane makes a flat surface on a piece of wood. They don't know how to clamp the wood and how to push it evenly and what part of the grain. But perhaps the AI is the patient tutor or that will facilitate that instruction. That be it a service or an agent or whatever that will get them over that hurdle. You cannot get the best advantage out of an application like Tinderbox without knowing A, what it is that you want out of it, and B, what facilities Tinderbox has to make that happen. There's a lot of intricate detail in between there. If you want to start calling run command, if you want to use AppleScript, if you want to make a poster, there's a lot of detail that you have to learn. AI can abstract a lot of that away, but you have to understand what those things are, what a poster is, what it can do, what a run command can do, reaching out to the OS. So ultimately, I think that's where the maybe not the best value, but a lot of value can be found in some level of integration between AI and Tinderbox. Does that make any sense? Does that advance the conversation in any way?
Yeah, the question is, so how? So, Mr. Bernstein, what are the how thoughts that come to mind when you hear that?
Ah, sorry, I was just checking something in the code. Give me a little bit more runway.
Okay. All right. What are your thoughts, Chuck, on the how response to that? Hang on, I got my dog's.
I don't know. I feel like I've been dominating the conversation too much. I should shut up.
I think we're going to evolve there. I think we're in the process of doing that now, where there's what I always looked at Tinderbox as an outliner. I have the distinct impression that the preferred interface is the map, and I just don't grok the map. I love the outliner. And so I think with AI, it's a similar thing that I don't mind having a chat with a chat bot, but there's no way I want that chat bot to touch my document. So, copy and paste is about as far as I'm willing to go with that guy. I'm happy to have the chat bot tell me how to write action code and copy and paste that into my Tinderbox, but no way is that AI touching my document. So I think we're going to get there, but we're kind of feeling our way through it right now. Two approaches.
Yeah,
One is AI can control your Tinderbox, and one is AI just holds your hand while and looks over your shoulder as you muddle through trying to get what you want, if you know what you want.
I also think there's going to be a human element in all of this that is struggling to come to the forefront. And that is, if we look at how technology has always evolved in the past, there are a lot of people who futz around with it. There are a lot of people who make use of it. It has a profound impact on the economy, on society, things like that. But ultimately, there are the people who use the technology, but there are the people who do the high level thinking, the high level design, and really fashion the technology for various purposes. I mean, sometimes this is the realm of people who just think differently and approach the use of a technology in a different way. And I believe that we're going to see AI go down a similar path where there are going to eventually be people, individuals, who gain sufficient insights to understand, where AI is going to be applicable and how it should be integrated into the larger ecosystem. And right now, I just see a bunch of people running around like chickens with their heads cut off, trying to figure out how to get money to build massive data centers to do something they have no idea what it is. And I'm very skeptical that that's an approach that's going to work. I'm waiting for the grown-ups to show up and say, AI is really good at weather forecasting. Maybe we should spend more time focusing on that. Or AI has potential for helping to do better detailed analysis of medical scans. Maybe we should focus on that. AI has really demonstrated some remarkable abilities to understand protein folding. Let's focus on that. AI could be useful in tutoring, but only if it's given some very tight constraints and is topical in its approach. I think that's where there's going to be some breakthroughs is people, stop running, trying around to build the latest chat or agentic, whatever. And people who say, there's a real problem here, we can actually do something about. And I think, it's separating the wheat from the chaff. And there's just an awful lot of chaff out there right now.
Well, the consumer market is where all the big money is just because of the numbers. So that they're going to push it down to, the lowest level of the food chain with whatever,
Yeah,
um, image creation of, horrible stuff. And that's what's
yeah,
going on right now.
yeah, yeah. Take all the taking all the adult content safeguards off because that's that's what's really going to drive the numbers. Um, yeah, I guess at my age, it's hard not to be a skeptic about a lot of these things. Um, and unfortunately, looking back over the past 50 years, the technologies that have won in the market have seldom been the best technical approaches. Um, and often what drives a technology is broad consumer adoption for idiot purposes. Sorry to say.
Yet, where it's looping all the way back to the beginning. Today, Claude is just murder on happy to sit there and reason about concurrency conflicts that make my head hurt, my eyes glaze over. I mean, I I'm kind of the last of the self-taught autodidact programmers, and concurrency wasn't an issue when I was uh, getting started. So I'm late to this game, and it's everyone agrees that concurrency is hard, but Claude's got nothing better to do. So, our slaves of steel can sit and reason about boring one-off problems until we get rid of stupid bugs. And these are things that one of the crashes I got this week has been with us for a decade. And it doesn't harm anything really. It's a crash after everything has been unbuilt when you're quitting. But it's just annoying. I mean, you've probably all seen it. It doesn't happen all the time or even very often, but sometimes you quit and then Tinderbox crashes. And sorting that out, boy, I couldn't do it. Claude said, "Look at this." I said, "Ah, now I see it."
Well, that's where AI actually has some utility. It is very good at the pattern matching. And it's got a lot of patterns to look at, and it can look at a lot more than an individual user can, an individual person. So that's why it does so well with
Yeah.
weather. It's why it does so well with protein folding. And code is just another messy problem space. And if it has the ability to absorb lots of different patterns, it's going to be better at guiding toward solutions in that space. I think that's probably one of the better applications for it. And I think it's going to also take, if we think about Tinderbox and action code, I think it's going to take a lot of work to get an AI system to have enough working knowledge of patterns and coding patterns within Tinderbox to be effective at helping people debug Tinderbox action code.
Another way the current messy situation might not be as dire as it certainly seems. And I certainly have very little respect for the people who seem to be driving us off the cliff. But in the 1830s, in the great rush to build railroads, the British and the Americans had diametrically opposed solutions to the problem that we know we want to build railroads, and we have figured out how to get endless supplies of cow railroads. We don't really know what railroads are for. We've never had these before, and we know it's going to change the freight we carry, but we don't know in what ways. The Brits said there's going to be a ton of capital expended. Let's do it right and build. And the Americans said, oh, to hell with that. First mover is going to be everything. Let's throw something up and hope that it doesn't collapse in some horrific way before we have made enough money to fix it. And it turns out that the American approach was actually much better because you did get railroads up and running. And there are fewer, not zero, but there are fewer massive stone bridges over what are now hiking trails in the US than there are in England. There are all these vistas in England where you see tiny, tiny little country ways that have huge railroad bridges that must have cost an absolute fortune because they wanted to build it right. That was a mistake.
Well,
So
also, you know,
is that possibly part of the incremental formalization concept? You
Iterate
know,
fast.
Yeah, it's certainly related.
yeah.
I think we can see a lot of examples of that. One of the things that I think is interesting is when we talk about technology adoption, often the drivers, the adoption drivers for technology are not what people anticipate. So if you use the railroads as an example, the thought that you could actually get fresh produce from where it was grown to where it could be consumed was not something that, as I understand it, the railroads originally anticipated. But once you could get oranges from Texas or Florida to Chicago, suddenly there was a market that did not exist before. And you know, a lot of things we see going on with information technology are adoption being driven by markets that people who develop the technology never anticipated. And I think that's absolutely going to be a factor in the way that AI evolves. But
Just for random trivial knowledge in the future, railroad unintended consequences. Um, Porter, the the car, the sleeper car, Pullman sleeper car. He had the vision that he would make train travel luxurious and comfortable for wealthy people. And because the Civil War had just recently ended, there was a large number of black people who were, by for formerly enslaved people who, because of their experience, were accustomed to serving white people. So he could hire them for very low wages and they would perform a role that they were familiar with. And because he paid them so little, that's where tipping began. It was to ensure prompt service or something like that. And that practice spread throughout the economy and lives with us today and distorts, much of the economy. But all because of the railroad and the guy saw an opportunity to make money on passenger travel and America's original sin. So
And now we're forced to like tip at a point of sale automatic system when the service person behind the counter absolutely did zero.
yeah, you're signing your fingertip on the iPad, 20% tip. Yeah.
Yeah, right on. So, in the last 10 minutes we have, let's talk about a couple best practices. So, Mark, so one best practice that I can at least verbalize for people is when you're writing action code, and it's not working for you, one nice place to look is the use of smart quotes versus straight quotes. Because when you're first getting started in action code, you often experiment with writing it in the text of a note, and the text of the note will automatically convert a straight quote to a curly quote, and then that will break your action code. So that's just something that's a best practice tip to look out for. And we can demonstrate that if people are interested. Another one, Mark, that I wanted to have you kind of talk about a little bit, and and this goes back to what Chuck and I were trying to accomplish with the quote unquote flattening map discussion for a year and a half or two ago that resulted in Chuck's amazing charting utility and installer that he built. And the way I go about doing it often, in a poor man's version of that, is using aliases and agents. Is that comment you made in the chat today is, map view is best practice for brainstorming. And I agree with that. But one of the challenges I have is, once I've gotten my brainstorming done, I then want to click over to outline view to start writing my article. And then invariably, as I then start nesting those notes from the brainstorming, I end up destroying my map view. So the question is, like, how do you balance that? What is and this goes back kind of to Chuck's point about that mindset strategic approach down the road versus the short-term tutorial of this is how you can do this right now, versus if you take a step back and think about it a little bit, you can end up saving yourself a tremendous amount of time later, or save yourself from destroying your thinking. What Chuck and Mark, what are your thoughts behind that?
I don't think you're destroying your thinking.
Well,
I think you may be done with the map. If you're not done with the map, save the map and copy things into another place.
okay. So then okay. So there's a best practice, because the natural tendency is not wanting to duplicate or create extra work or create extra chaff. So you'll start moving stuff around unbeknownst to yourself, that in doing that in outline view, that, and when I say destroy, it doesn't mean the notes go away. It means the structure of your map view gets changed, because of the many novice users don't understand that the difference between map view and outline view, and the way notes are managed or organized. Chuck, you look like you're about to comment.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, the reason I developed the diagram view was because of that problem. But to Mark's point, it's basically a copying operation. It's basically an intelligent way to copy out of your outline or your map, wherever you get your notes, to copy them into a different place, and they are true copies, so that you can then work with them in map view in a way that makes sense. So it's just taking the existing tools and leveraging them. I agree with Mark that you start out by doing some brainstorming with the map view, and then you go and work on an outline. You've probably already expanded or gone beyond the original conceptualization you were doing in the map view, and now you're maybe starting to think about, well, I really would like a diagram that shows these things and their interrelationships. And that was the problem that I was trying to solve. So I think there's an evolution. People are going to start in one place in the tool and then move into some other place in the tool. And I think that's just a natural process that people have to decide in their own context. Do they want to keep the original map concept in place? Is that useful to them or not? And if so, how do they want to do it?
Yeah, and I think that how do you want to do it though too is because I've seen with some of my more complex map views, when I get even 100+ notes, the idea of copying all of those and then reorganizing them into outline view and then having its text be disassociated, it can be more complex than one thinks after a while.
Yeah. And again, that was one of the reasons why in the diagram view I developed, I gave a lot of thought to what you want to copy from the base document into the diagram. So if you want to copy the text from the note, if you want to copy the color, so you have complete control over what that copy operation does.
Yeah.
Is it a perfect solution? No, it's not. It's a lot of people probably find it too cumbersome or too complicated. But if you have a reason for it, then it would, and you know what you're trying to do, then it's probably fairly straightforward to set it up and have it work the way you want, and you can adapt it and change it as you go along.
Yeah.
And you can still keep the synchronization going between these parts as you would like to have it. But there are lots of other ways of doing things. If I were to come back to your earlier comment about curly quotes, straight quotes, things like that, I think there's a best practice that maybe we could explore in a future session, which is there's another way of dealing with it, and that is to say curly quotes are curly quotes and straight quotes are straight quotes. If you're working in action code, do it on a note that is going to have is not going to do conversion of straight quotes to curly quotes.
For sure.
Use
the
the
action
code.
code.
Yeah,
Use the code
prototype.
template,
Yeah.
the prototype. And then if you're in that environment and you want to actually have something which is intended to be a quote from a human perspective, use the curly quote symbol. I mean, you've got this vast library of code symbols. Just do the right option key sequence to put in true curly quotes inside of a document that is otherwise straight quotes.
Yeah.
And that solves a whole plethora of problems within Tinderbox and many other languages. I mean, Tinderbox's problems in that space are not unique to Tinderbox. It's again one of these stupid things that the industry did a long time ago, and we're paying the price time and time again because we mixed up syntax for computer and syntax for human, and we have forever gone down that path and driven people crazy.
Yeah.
But if you've got a rich code set, use it.
Yeah. All right, guys. Well, it's at 10:30. So awesome. Thanks for the discussion today.
Okay.
Talk to you next week.
I'll
Bye-bye.